I've seen a huge uptick in people going out, making jokes, making videos about how they despise this new trend of people giving last names as first names to children. But at the same time, I'm also seeing people opt in for these names for their children. You know, you have videos of young mothers really just pull out their babyless names, and they're talking about how they wanted something different, something unique, but also represented their likes. A lot of times you see people who are like, me and my husband love comic book characters, and we want to name our son one of this. Me and our husband love this person, and we wanted to reflect that. And I get it. I get wanting to feel different, but I also get how it may seem weird. But especially, it seems almost like a new thing about people naming their children after, let's say, musicians, authors, poets, among other famous figures. But naming someone after someone has been a thing since the dawn of time. It's usually a first name, but it's happening since the dawn of time. You know, we can see it as within families. A lot of people name themselves after their children after fathers or grandparents, or even after kings. But the trend, because it wasn't really a trend, I guess, but this thing of naming your child from a last name has actually been a thing for quite a few hundred years at this point. And there are so many names that are so popular at this point. I'm talking like top 100 popular that came from surnames that we have almost no idea, because we don't look at them as surnames, right? We look at them as names. So what I want to do today is dive into a bunch of names, some older, some newer, and try to bring up to present day of names that came from surnames. So let's get into this. Madison. Madison is one of those names that should be a male's name because it means Matthew's son. And this name became popular in the 80s after the main character in Splash was named Madison. Now, I'm unsure if all the people watching Splash who grew up and had children were like, wow, I just can't get her out of my mind, I love that name, all decided to name their child Madison, but it is now in the top like 15 names consistently. And another one that's very similar to this is Addison. Now, the hint here is the son suffix, because this name means son of Adam. I'm unsure why exactly this name became popular, and it did actually used to be a male's name, but this name became more popular for females in the 90s. Kennedy. When we think Kennedy, we think JFK. And that's a good reason to, because that's actually when the name became more popular for given as a first name. So it was actually in the 60s that it kind of took off as a boy's name. And in the 90s, it kind of took off as a girl's name. So you might actually see a Kennedy for either gender. But this name means helmet head or misshapen head, and comes from the Irish surname. Now, one thing I want to bring up when I'm discussing names that come from Irish or Scottish surnames, they are 90% of the time anglicized. So bear that in mind. Calvin. When I think Calvin, I think Calvin and Hobbes. Well, this name actually was not a first name until the 17th century, when John Calvin, the Protestant reformer, became quite popular, and people wished to name their son after Calvin. And I do love this name, but it means bald. Graham. Graham comes from a Scottish last name that originates from an area actually in England, Grantham. And this name means gravel area. This name became popularized as a first name in the 12th century after there was an Anglo-Norman land baron named William de Graham who formed the Scottish clan Graham. This next one is one of the oldest names on this list, and it's Becket. Becket became popular in the 12th century after the Bishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, and this name means beehive. Blair. Blair is one of those Scottish surnames that comes from a place or an area, and this name can come to translate to meaning a meadow, a field, or even battlefield. And there's also the clan Blair. So I'm unsure why exactly this became so popular, but my biggest hypothesis is after the clan, the Scottish clan. Cameron. Cameron, like Kennedy, is one of those names that have kind of become unisex. And this was another one that comes from a Scottish surname, and it became popular in the 1980s. Unsure exactly why, but this name means crooked nose. Wallace. This name, I like the meaning, like, I think this is kind of funny. But Wallace became a name in the 12th century, and it was introduced by a group of people who came to Scotland. It was a family of tenants of the Stuarts. Can you guess what Wallace means? It means Welshman. These people were Welsh. Finnegan. Finnegan is one of those anglicized Irish surnames which became a first name, and it means son of Fairhead. And this became popular in the 19th century, and it's still in the top 100 names. Rylan. Rylan was a name that was introduced around the Norman conquest, and it's a topographical name. It was a last name, and the last name represented from the rye fields, and it was owned by the Rye family, who owned fields of rye. Now, I'm unsure how this became a popular first name. I like to believe it comes from a long family line, but this has been in the top 1,000 names for over 2 decades. Hudson, another one of those son suffix. This one's a male name, unlike Madison and Addison. And this name became popular in the last 50 years, and it means son of Hud. This is another one where we don't really understand why the uptick in the name, as it's in the top 100, but I like to think it's after Rock Hudson, the actor. Kinsley. Kinsley comes from an old English name, and it's one of the American variations we have. This name means King's Meadow, became popular in the 90s, but it originally comes from Kingsley. Maybe because this name is now used as almost unisex, maybe the king part made it sound masculine, so I'm unsure why the American variation dropped the G, but that's my theory. Wesley. Wesley is another one that comes from the 1700s, became popular, well, not so popular, but became a first name in the 1700s, and it means Western Meadow. This name comes from John Wesley, another Protestant reformer who formed the Methodist Church, John Wesley. Colton. If you kind of hear it out, you can try to put the meaning together. Colton. This name means coal town. Usually given to someone that lived or was a part or owned a town that, usually a mining town. Byron. If you've heard of Byron, you're probably assuming that it comes from Lord Byron, and you're correct. Byron became a popular first name in the 19th century after Lord Byron the poet, and it seemed that many poet lovers decided this was a great name. This name means from the byres or from the cow sheds, and usually was given to someone who worked with cattle. What I find so interesting about this name is it's one of the older names that became popular from an artistic figure compared to a religious figure or a topographical name. Now, there are many more popular last names turned first names that happen to also be occupational names, which I am saving for another video. And what I mean by this is names that came from someone's job. So a huge example of this, because this became a popular thing in the Middle Ages, the name Smith. Smith was given as a family name to people, or a man with a family who worked as a blacksmith. Now there are many names that were last names from jobs that have sneaked their way into our top 100 names that I find equally as interesting, but I think that deserves a whole video of its own. I do have some honorable mentions I wanted to mention in this, that these are newer last names turned first names per se, that I've noticed on many videos I've been sort of tagged in against my will to, I guess, analyze some of these names. And a few of them are Hendrix, after Jimi Hendrix, Bowie, after David Bowie, Cohen, after, I'm presuming, Leonard Cohen. It would be interesting if it was after the Coen brothers. And another one I found interesting was Bronte, after the Bronte sisters. I do have to give an honorable mention to a little boy I know named Camus, after Albert Camus. So please, if you liked this video and you enjoy the history of names, consider subscribing to my channel where I discuss all things names and it related to history.